And then every elder meeting, we actually have a member review portion where we're looking at every member in the church and we're going, hey, how are they doing? How are they doing? How are they doing? But it's so important, I think, for people to know that if I'm a sheep in a field, I want to know that my shepherds not only are just looking at the fences for the wolves coming in, but they actually know me and they're feeding me. And if my wool is getting a little bit dirty, if my a little bit of mud on my feet, or if I tip over and I'm kind of sitting there and I need help, like they see me. That's just a good, healthy church. So, Dean, is it bad, wrong, mean for a church to tell someone they have to leave if they're in open rebellion and sin against the word of God?
No, if you're in a faithful biblical church, it should be very clear who's in the church and who's out of the church.
So what if a church doesn't do that?
I think there's a lot of lack of clarity.
Because 2 weeks
impurity.
ago, 2 weeks ago, I had to do that. The elders had worked with a couple for, I don't know how long.
Like a year.
A year.
Yep.
And this guy's having an adulterous affair. His young family, he's just ditching them.
Yep.
And so we worked the case. We've done everything we could. And I had to get up in front of the church, step 3 of Matthew 18, and say, hey, we all need to go after this brother, or else he's going to have to be excommunicated. And his wife is in the front row, along with his teenage daughter and their 2 little ones. And they're all crying. So I would say most churches these days don't do active church discipline. Would you agree or disagree?
I think they don't, because I think a lot of churches don't do regenerate church membership.
Okay, so let's talk about membership.
Let's talk about that. So what are some of your key biblical principles? If we're going to start out, maybe we're riding up the elevator. Give me your elevator.
I'll give the skeleton, you put flesh on it.
Okay.
So I would say Jesus, John 13, talks about this love ethic that's going to happen between the guys. I think clearly by the time you get to Acts 2, the launch of the church, you see it. You see numbers involved, which they know who's in and who's out. Mm-hmm. You see a list for widows. You get to Hebrews 13, 17, and you see this clarity that there are leaders responsible for the souls of certain people. So I think what happens is you have a principle, an acorn that Jesus drops, and then it blossoms the rest of the New Testament into what I would consider to be an assumed version of informal or formal church membership. So color that in.
Yeah, I think you're right. It seems to be the presupposition of all the letters to the churches,
yep.
Right? There's one another's. Who are the one another's? They're the other church members. When he's talking about, hey, you guys are a body, and each of you are a unique part, uniquely gifted for this body.
Yep.
I think it's good for a body to know which liver is theirs and which liver is not theirs, right? To use that analogy, he calls them a building.
Yeah.
You guys are all bricks laid on each other. Well, you want to know what building you're a part of. But you're right. You look back at Acts, Jerusalem, there's 3,000 added to their number this day. And you walk through, and we walk through this in our membership class, how many times it says, and more were added to their number that day, over and over throughout the whole book. And you just have to ask, like, who's they? What's a number? And
who's counting?
And who's counting? So that
Luke,
means there is a count.
Luke's a doctor. He's not adding that. He had to get those numbers from somebody. He's going back 10 years. Somebody had to have had the numbers. What about 1 Corinthians 14?
And they're definitely not talking about, too, I think it's helpful to note, they're not talking about many attendees came that day. They're always talking about, in Acts, people that are converted and baptized and added to their number. It's not just people that were curious about this the way.
And when you only have one church in any city, you would know who's in your church and who's not in your church.
Yep.
1 Corinthians 14 seems to suggest that there's an outsider who walks in, looks at the people who are in the church and understands that he's not a part of the church, which means they also know that he's an outsider and not. So he's
not voting with his feet, and the fact that he's there for a church member.
Voting with your feet is an old Calvary Chapel maxim, if people haven't heard that before, which is we don't need membership because you just vote by whether you come or not, which has been adopted now by churches, especially in California, because we're chill culture, post-Jesus revolution.
It's non-offensive.
And the idea is like you can be a special person. What do they call them? VIPs or very important member, very important person. They have names for them, right?
Actively committed participants and attendees.
Which is another way of saying we know who's here most often.
Yep.
But there's not clarity of covenant membership. Now, here's the problem I see with that. Without definition of terms, I don't know that the leaders really are clear what the servants are doing. I don't know if the servants are really clear what the leaders are to be doing. And that could really quickly turn into, and I think I feel deal. Because like if my home, if you come over to my house and I'm like, hey, let's feed Dean tonight. Dean's and Megs they need a meal. That's hospitality, but you're not a part of my family. If you go, hey, I want to live here, well, let's adopt you and let's figure out, but that's a paper, that's a contract, that's a covenant, and we both agree to what that means. So I don't know how you have a functioning, and then here's the key word, pure church, if you don't have some form of church membership. So.
Yeah, I mean, you had referenced in the bullet points you laid out earlier that there's the government and the overseeing of souls, but if you're only overseeing those that are thriving, the VIPs, the people that are giving and serving and just doing so well in the church, then your job's like pretty easy.
Yeah.
Because by definition, the ones you oversee are the ones that are just nailing it. And so again, by definition, if someone falls off that map, you go, well, they're not a member, so I don't need to oversee them.
All right, let me throw this at you because you're a church history guru. Let's say that the exegetical work would suggest church membership, church history.
Early enough when you're, before Constantine, I think it's very obvious who's in the church and who's not, because you guys are all huddled together shaking because you don't know if he's going to come after you and haul you off to jail.
Yeah, you had to get back.
You were baptized publicly, declaring Christ
in a
as
river,
Lord.
a stream, a brook, somewhere.
Yep.
And knowing that you could lose your head. So then Pliny the Elder, for example, is writing letters saying these little groups of people meet and they sing to this guy that apparently died and left. So let's go, Didache baptized in, communion retains. So that's 110, 120. Yep.
Well, that carries through the whole Middle Ages,
so
right? Especially as the church forms as a larger institution. Very clear that there's that you're baptized in at whatever age, that depends on where you're at. Very clear who's in, who's out, and frequently, if not always, communion is kept away from is kept within only if you're a member of the church. Yep. And then by the time you're getting the Reformation, this becomes really important. And you have that classic scene. Who is it that goes and jumps out in front of the communion table to make sure only someone will tell
Aaron,
me?
Elijah,
yeah,
somebody
come on.
smart in the room.
They're asleep.
Okay. All right. We'll fill it. Tanny, at it right here over our shoulder right now. Ready? And bing. Go.
That guy. Yeah, he goes out. There's a classic story. He jumps in front and says, like, don't get in front of the table. And I don't know, that was a really bad storytelling, but it's a really big deal. It matters to him. But you even see... Well,
Calvin goes back and grabs Augustine in the idea of if God is your father, the church is your mother, there's going to be a unity and participation was Calvin's terminology, to say like there's no such thing as a Christian that's not participating with the whole. So the reformers are clearly grabbing on to the early fathers.
Which again, though, you go biblical and you have all these letters in the New Testament, and even the few, which most of them are written to churches, yep. And the only ones that aren't written to churches are written to keep people in churches as it relates to their local church. And so there's never this idea of like, hey, solo Christian, I just want you to know God loves you.
Let's talk about solo
off on your
Christian.
Own.
Let's talk about solo Christian. I'm going to go, you always say, is any Francis Schaeffer going to make it in? And I say, no, not this time, but he might have right now. So
right.
There was never in history an archetype. And I would like to encourage anyone, if you found one in the comments, plug it in and tell me. If you can find in history the idea of a lone ranger who moves out of his community to on his own try to right size and fix a society. That is an archetype that as far as I can tell is brand new and introduced by the American mid-century rationalism. When once we said there is no God, everything is fate and chance. It was the group of kids in the 1940s and 50s that grew up under this evolutionary theory that said, hey, if that's all true, then I guess I'm a rebel without a cause. And so you go back to James Dean, you go back to Shane, you go back to High Noon, you go back to Clint Eastwood. This concept of I don't need a group, but I'm an individual. And as an individual, what I say goes, what I decide is best, and I can fix things on my own is as far as I can tell, it is new. And I think that is where the vote with your feet stuff came from.
That's right. So the church reacted to that and said, okay, that's what we're dealing with now. That's right.
Yeah. And to be fair, the Jesus Revolution, they're going, what else are we going to do? We're not going to accept him and try to... But that's the heartbeat of it. Lone Ranger Christianity is something I don't think you ever hear of in history until the 1950s and 60s in America. Okay, so we got the Bible, we got the book,
yep.
We got church history.
Yep.
So now take that, talk to the person who might argue for non-church membership. What would you say to them?
I think you have to ask why, right? If you're I think there's a desire for independence that overlays, but perhaps underneath there's this refusal to commit. I don't want to commit to this body because, like anything, you had referenced it to dating and marriage. But are you going to commit to this body requires more than just I like to attend. And we, especially in American culture, we like comfortable, we like ease. I mean, my goodness, we like online church that I don't even have to get off the couch and put my clothes on to attend church. There's no commitment.
Right.
But if you're signing a covenant saying, no, this is the body I'm part of, this is the church that I give to, I serve, I give of my life and our time, and we disciple one another in the church, we're functioning and obeying the one another commands in the church, that requires of me much.
That's good.
And I don't think that's a common desire. I don't think you're going to find someone that wants to do all those things and is also refusing to join a church officially.
That's good. Yeah. So let's take that over to the church discipline issue. We talked about the fact that every once in a while we have an issue, a case pop up.
Right. So the membership ties in with church discipline. You talked history. It's fascinating. You go back to the 1500s, the Belgic Confession, and in one of their questions, they say, what is a true church? And they boil it down to 3 principles. And they say, well, number 1, you're preaching the gospel faithfully. Number 2, you're doing a proper administration of the sacraments. So baptism and communion, biblically done. And then the third is you have church discipline. And so already even back there, you see this is
huge.
Core to a church.
That's
to be
huge.
To be a true church.
Let's
3
ask
things.
everybody to pause right there. And if you're listening, on 1.25, I want everyone to stop. I want them to rewind, and I want them to go back and listen to that. You need to say that again, because is that also true not just in Belgium, but Westminster or anything else?
It's standard. It's expected.
So say that over. Say it slow so everyone hears that when we go back and we look at what we would consider to be the very forefathers of our tradition.
Yep.
You're saying across confession, everyone agrees there's 3 things that make a true local church. State those again.
Right. Do you guys do you preach the gospel faithfully?
Okay.
Well, that obvious.
Right. Sound doctrine.
Number 2, do you administer the sacraments or the ordinances?
Okay.
So baptism and communion.
Great.
And then third, do you operate with church discipline?
Okay. So I'm going to press you there because now people are listening and they're saying, Dean just said that the historic understanding of church is these 3 things, including discipline. So what then would we be forced to say about churches who don't have covenant membership in a kind way?
You have to ask, well, then by what standard are you calling yourself a true church? What is your definition? Because you don't anymore declare who's in and who's out. And it's fascinating. I mean, you go back into Matthew, and there's only 2 instances, right? In all the Gospels, there's only 2 locations where the word church is even used, Matthew 16 and Matthew 18, right? And in 16, he says, I'm going to build my church.
Right.
And then in 18, he says, let me give you clear instructions of what to do when there's sin in the church. And it's church discipline. And he walks through those steps. That's all Jesus, while on this earth, said about the church before the Great Commission.
Which brings us back to where we started. So Jesus says there is going to be this thing called a church. We're going to know who's in and out. And then we get to that Matthew 18 template for then what you're doing with people who aren't abiding by the community standards.
Right. So walk us through the steps.
So if Matthew 18 is the template, and then you've got through the rest of the New Testament kind of these case studies where we go, okay, we see how Paul worked it out. For example, 1 Corinthians 5, immorality. 2 Thessalonians 3, we've got the breaking of fellowship. Titus 3, we've got the factions, so the 2 warnings, right? So it's almost like Jesus gives a template, and then we get to see how Paul, and sometimes he steps in and he goes, this is an immediate removal because it's such a heinous activity. Whereas other times he steps in and he goes, hey, you need to go ahead and admonish and then remove so they can feel the pain of their choice. Other times he steps in and goes, hey, if it's a division issue, it's going to be a clear 1, 2, and then you're out. So it's like the eldership is given the freedom by Paul to analyze every single case and then work it out in a way that ultimately Galatians chapter 6, 1 and 2 is towards the best goal or hope of restoration. Right? So we do everything with a spirit of gentleness and humility, looking as unto ourselves first to make sure that the goal of this is not to embarrass or shame the person, but to bring a holy reverence and fear to the church and then hopefully expose the individual to their sin, just like chastisement or giving your son or daughter, a consequence, so that then they'll be brought back into the fold. So the whole is now purified and the individual is now sanctified. That seems to be the heartbeat of New Testament.
I think so. I mean,
discipline.
Even Matthew 18, right? Jesus is giving these teachings in a series of it. And right before church discipline, if you just look up, it's the shepherd with the 99 and one strays away.
Yeah.
And that's the heartbeat behind it.
That's good.
That, a sheep strays away. So what do? Well, you want to go bring him back in and care for him. You leave the 99, you take care of the one. And it's kind of funny, after he finishes talking about church discipline, then Peter's like, well, how many times do we have to forgive then? Because he's understanding, this is going to happen a lot, and we're going to have to deal with sin in the church.
It's astronomical.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think people need to know that. Like at our church, for example, and this is different for every church, but like we have a membership roster. So we actually, as elders, are praying over everybody in the church. I think every evening, I know I do, I go through the A's and then the B's and the C's and the D's. And then every elder meeting, we actually have a member review portion where we're looking at every member in the church and we're going, hey, how are they doing? How are they doing? How are they doing? Which gets harder with time and, as the numbers grow. But it's so important, I think, for people to know that if I'm a sheep in a field, I want to know that my shepherds not only are just looking at the fences for the wolves coming in, but they actually know me and they're feeding me. And if my wool is getting a little bit dirty, if my a little bit of mud on my feet, or if I tip over and I'm kind of sitting there and I need help, like they see me. That's just a good, healthy church. So let me ask you kind of a final takeaway question. How would a person apply this? Like let's say his name is Sam, and Sam, if you're out there, leave a comment. He's listening. He's going, okay, I agree. I agree that a church needs to be done God's way. And I agree that there's going to be discipline involved in membership. Like, how would he apply this? Like, what would he do? Step one.
Step one, look in the mirror. Are you in a church? Are you committed to a church? I think that's a good question.
Yeah.
But then moving that to the next, okay, you're committed to a church. Look at the church that you're committed to. Do they take it seriously? Do you have a plurality of elders? Do you have multiple elders who are seeking to structure their church like the Bible commands us to, who take the job of overseeing seriously?
Yeah.
And is it clear to them that you're a part of their church, or do they just view you as an attendee and that's it? Is there church discipline? Are they concerned for the sake of your soul that if you fall into sin, they're going to come after you and that they're even going to rebuke you to the point of public excommunication for the sake of your soul if you so refuse to repent?
Let me add to Sam one thing. If you are a lone ranger, you have to ask yourself why. To that point right there. You have to go back and rewind again and listen to what Dean just said. Like, if you want to be on the outside and you don't want to be brought to a place of penitence, you don't desire repentance, you like to have a foot in the world and then a foot in church to kind of assuage your conscience, that is a wake-up call, because that is not what a true sheep will respond like. And I think that's the biggest wake-up call. If you're an individual and you go, I don't really care too much about church, I don't know that I really want discipline, I don't want people getting in my business, that to me is a clarion call about a potential deficiency in your soul. And so I would encourage you, like Dean said, to immediately take consideration of the church you're in. If you have a great church, go all the way in.
Yep.
And if you have friends and family that are there, open yourself up to them and say, I want you all to walk me through this life all the way home to glory.
Yeah, and he even talks about it in Hebrews 13 when talking about submitting to your elders. He says, make it a joy for them.
Yes.
I try to make it a joy for you as a fellow member of the church.
I'm sorry, man. I know that often I don't make it a joy for you. Maybe that's something everyone could pray for, is help me to make life more of a joy for Dean and everybody else. But hey, I sure appreciate you, man.
Likewise. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Christianly. Please drop a like, a comment, share it with a friend. And if you're not a part of a good, faithful, biblical church that has membership, check out the description. We'll have a church finder below for you.